Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Otive-Igbuzor, and I am the lecturer for the class on gender and leadership. Let me start by thanking my sister Ememoko, who is the brain behind the Port Harcourt Center of the CLSD Leadership School. Much as I would have loved to be with you in person, I just couldn't fly into Port Harcourt today, so decided to do this video, and I am on standby on Zoom to take comments and questions. Thank you very much for bearing with me. First, let's look at the training objectives. The first one is to enhance participants' knowledge of gender and related concepts, and the second is to enhance participants' gender sensitivity and ability to promote gender equality in all spheres. So the lesson today will not turn us into automatic gender experts, but it will point us in the right direction as to how to apply the gender lens, to analyze any situation. And when we talk about gender equality, it is something that plays around us every day, whether we're at home, whether we're at work, whether we're in the marketplace, in school, wherever we find ourselves. It is such a relevant subject, and my prayer is that after this class, everybody will put on their gender lenses, begin to analyze issues and to respond appropriately. Now, if you have attended the early lectures in this leadership school, you would have learned about the concept of leadership. So you would have been told that there are many ways to define leadership, but one universal way is to say that leadership is influence. And if leadership is influence, you will agree with me that men are able to influence things as much as women are also able to influence things. Even children do exercise influence, when given the opportunity to do so. So leadership happens to be something that is suitable for everybody. Another thing I love about leadership is the fact that leadership is not essentially the portfolio that you hold. It's not the title that you carry. Leadership is actually the qualities that you display in any relationship. And where do we lead? We lead everywhere. We lead at home, we lead in our compounds, we lead in church. If you're a Muslim, you lead in the mosque, at work, at school, in the public or private sphere. Now, one key ingredient for measuring democracy and good governance is participation. So if we talk about key ingredients, we have things like transparency, accountability of our leaders, responsiveness to the needs of the poor and marginalized and underrepresented groups. But participation stands out as one of the key ingredients for measuring good governance. And when we talk about participation, of course, we know that in the kind of democracy that we run in our country, and even anywhere in the world for that matter, it is not possible for us to gather everybody in every local government area, every state, and put them in one room or in one space and make them participate in decision making. And that is why we practice representative democracy, where we elect leaders, to go to parliament, to be in the executive offices, to represent us, to speak on our behalf. And the expectation is that before anyone has the mandate to speak on your behalf, the person would have consulted with you. So whatever they're saying at the National Assembly or at the State Assembly, they're actually speaking, to our aspirations. But we all know that in many instances, that is not the case. Now, participation is a human right. And it is expected that since we have women and we have men, and we have boys and we have girls, young people, when decisions are to be made, it is important that people of various categories are given the opportunity to participate in decision making, either directly or through their representatives. And one of the things that the Beijing Platform for Action, highlighted in 1995, and which is still true today, is the near absence of women from political decision making. And this has a negative impact on the entire process of democratization. I do not want to leave this discussion to just the political sphere. If you look around you, even in homes, you find a situation where in many homes, many women do not have a say. Even though women are supposed to wield power in their homes, because they are so involved in the process of, nurturing, they're supposed to wield a lot of power. But in many homes, women have little or no say, and it's something that has gone beyond the home to the entire society, and into government spaces where we're supposed to have effective participation. Now let's look at the concept of representation versus participation. Like I said before, we practice representative democracy. And in representative democracy, elected officials nominally speak for their constituents, and their constituents are women and men. It is also ideal that in those spaces where those elected officials operate, it is ideal that we have women, it is ideal that we have men. It's also ideal that we cascade this classification beyond women and men to include other, social classes. So for example, persons with disability, they need to be represented in those political spaces where decisions are made. Now on representation, two categories of representation have also been identified. One is what we call numerical or descriptive representation. In numerical representation, an individual represents a group by virtue of sharing similar characteristics with that group. So for example, an Igbo person should represent Igbos, an Ijaw person should represent the Ijaws, a woman should represent women, a young person should represent young people, and so on and so forth. That is descriptive or numerical representation. But there's another type of representation which is so important. It's so important in our situation in Nigeria, because when we talk about numerical representation, there is no balance. So we have situations where we have either more men in parliament than women, and so if you are going to deal on the basis of numerical representation, women are already defeated. We'll come to that issue shortly. But on substantive representation, it goes beyond numbers. It goes beyond standing in for the group to which you belong. It is like having men who believe in women's issues also standing up, and supporting those issues when the issues are raised, even if the women, in that decision-making space are not adequate to represent that group. So substantive representation, is that type of representation in which the individual seeks to advance a particular group's policy, preferences, and interests without necessarily being a member of the group. It's like a Yoruba person standing up to say the Igbos have been marginalized, and this is not right. Or the Igbo man standing up to say the Yorubas have been marginalized, and this is not correct. That is substantive representation. Getting someone to believe in your cause, even if they don't belong to that group. Now, as we go ahead, it will be good for us to just talk briefly. I'm not going to make any serious academic definitions, but I'm just going to talk briefly about some gender-related concepts. Some of these concepts we use every day in, our various discourses. Sometimes even gender experts are not on the same page as to the meanings of these words, but we keep trying to clarify. And interestingly, also the meanings of the words keep changing, as we know that nothing is static in life. But at this time, this is how we understand these concepts. So let's look at the concept of gender versus sex. And when we talk about sex, we all know that sex is a biological feature that differentiates, that makes a woman and a man different. It is biological. And that is why we say sex is nature. When we talk about gender, gender has to do with beliefs, customs, roles and responsibilities assigned to persons, either women or men or boys and girls, based on, you know, what that particular society believes or operates, you know. So that is why you find that in some societies, the particular way they look at a woman and the things they expect, the attributes of a woman or the roles assigned to women may be quite different from the roles assigned in the next community. So there are some tribes in Nigeria that do not believe that a woman should carry anything on her head. It's actually a taboo. But in some places, that is the normal thing to do. Women need to carry things on their heads. There are communities that don't believe that a woman should pound yam, for example. I'm just giving some random examples. Whereas in other communities, it is the woman that pounds. So in those communities that don't believe that women should pound, it is the men that pound. There are communities that don't believe that women should fetch water. But in some communities, it is a woman's role. Now, when you begin to see these differences, you know, from one community to another, you know that we are dealing with gender, because it has to do with beliefs and customs. It is how we have practiced it. Maybe our grandparents practiced it that way and they passed on that knowledge to us. It is how we have been nurtured or socialized. And that is why we say that while sex is nature, which is biological, of course the features that make one a woman or man will not change naturally on their own. If you travel out of your country to a different country, if you're a man in Nigeria, you're still a man in Japan. Unless, of course, in this modern day of genetic engineering where people want to change their sex, you know, but we're speaking, naturally speaking, a woman in Nigeria is a woman wherever she goes. But when it comes to roles, you find that the way a woman operates in Port Harcourt, for example, may be different from, you know, even the nearby places like Warri or some other place, depending on the beliefs of the people. So that is for gender versus sex. And then there is the concept of gender equity versus equality. Now, gender equality is a goal, it's a result that we want to achieve. And when we talk about equality, we are not in any way saying that everybody is of the same size, everybody has the same education, everybody has the same talent or the same passion or interest, not at all. But gender equality is ensuring that everybody, no matter your height, no matter your size, no matter your sex, no matter your tribe, is given the same opportunity, you know, and in fact, some variations are made in those opportunities to enable us achieve our full potentials. So the example I normally give is to say, okay, if a very tall person is standing behind a wall and needs to watch a football game going on the other side of the wall, the person does not need any support to see above the wall to watch the football game that is going on. But a short person that stands below the wall, we need some form of support. You need to put either a stool or a block for the person to stand on to be able to see. What is the goal? The goal is for everybody, no matter their height, no matter their calling, no matter their tribe or whatever, to watch that football game that is going on the other side of the wall. And you know, in order to make that happen, there are measures that we must put in place to remove the barriers, whatever it is that would have stopped someone from seeing above the wall. And when you take those steps, you know, to ensure that everybody has equal opportunity to watch the football match that's going on across the wall, you are applying what we call equity strategies. So equity in English language means fairness, and gender equity has to do with being fair to women and men according to their respective needs. If you do not factor in their respective needs, there is no way you can be fair. So while equity is a means to achieving a result, the result you are seeking to achieve is equality. Equality is the point at which everyone is able to gain, you know, to reap the gains of development. Then, of course, gender mainstreaming, of course, is to ensure that whatever it is you're doing, whether you're running a project or you're distributing resources, you first of all do what we call a gender analysis to find out who is left out, who is left behind, who is not benefiting at this time, and how can we move more resources to ensure that everyone benefits equally. That is what we refer to as gender mainstreaming. Now, there are so many concepts that time will not permit us to define all of them. We just have to either go on Google to Google some of those gender related concepts, or if you like, we can also pull out some handouts that define gender related concepts. Now, on the next slide, which is slide 11, we have stated that there are many international conventions or declarations or laws, global, regional, and national laws that support women's equal participation. One of them is the International Year of, there was a year, in the past, 1975, that was declared as the International Year of Women, and after that, there was a need to declare a decade for women from 1976 to 1985. This is just a little bit of history. And then, of course, we came up with what we call the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. And then, of course, we have what we call the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which specifically talks about the rights of women, and it was adopted in 2003 by the African Union. And we have several other laws like that. We also have in Nigeria what we call the National Gender Policy, and then we have the Child Rights Act, and then we also have now what we call the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which was enacted in the year 2015 after 14 long years of advocacy to get that bill to be passed into law, and it has now been passed into law. And so Nigeria has a law now that seeks to prevent sexual and gender-based violence, and in that law you have 26 different kinds of vices that are listed that constitute what we call gender-based violence. I think the problem right now is getting some states, we have like 21 states that have adopted the VAP Act. The challenge now is advocating and ensuring that every state in Nigeria adopts it, because when laws are made at the federal level, they do not take force of law in the states until they are adopted, and domesticated by the various states. And I know that a lot of efforts are being made right now by various organizations, including the Legislative Advocacy Coalition on Violence Against Women and several other organizations, to ensure that the VAP Act is implemented in the FCT and then in the states where it has been domesticated. Now, when I talk about gender equality, I like to split my approach into two. First is what I call the development approach, and the second is the ideological approach. Let's start with the development approach. And the development approach, it simply says that gender equality fosters development. If you want to see development happen, if you want to see progress made, you need to ensure that women and men are given the opportunity, removing all barriers to ensure that each person fulfills their potentials. Now, the countries that prioritize women's issues are at the top of the Human Development Index. Go and check it out, whether it has to do with maternal mortality reduction or infant mortality and stuff like that. The countries that have more women in parliament, more women in leadership, are actually at the top of the Human Development Index as it stands. And of course, Nigeria is not anywhere near the top. We all know that at this time. Okay, so there are several development measures to measure development, and Nigeria is not faring well in any of them. And to show you that gender equality is a development goal, the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 5, actually zeroes in on gender equality. And apart from Goal 5, people who have studied the goals also say that gender equality, is a critical lever for achieving all the 17 SDGs. But SDG 5 zeroes in on gender equality. And it says, it says to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And its focus is to end all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. And I like the way it is stated. All women means even the women in your village, the women in your home, the women in those remote places where you think these ones are not educated, therefore they can be downtrodden. Not at all. The SDG actually makes provision for every woman everywhere, no matter where they are. Still on development approach, you find that one of the targets under SDG 5 is target 5.5, and it says ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership. Remember, we're dealing with gender and leadership. Ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making. All levels includes your home. All levels includes the community. All levels includes the marketplace, the economic sphere, the political sphere, public life, and all of that. And there are two critical indicators of interest under target 5.5. There is 551, which says proportion of seats held by women in national parliaments and local governments. And the second one is proportion of women in managerial positions. Now, these are indicators. What do indicators do? They help us to measure ourselves whether we are making progress or not. So if we want to appraise Nigeria and to ask ourselves, or appraise Rivers State, where we're having this lecture, and appraise ourselves and ask the question, how are we faring with regards to gender equality? One place to look is to look at the proportion of seats held by women in the state parliament or in the national parliament or in local government. I don't know how it is in Port Harcourt at this time. How many women do we have in the State House of Assembly? In Nigeria, there are over 15 states, maybe more, that have 0 women in parliament. 0. There is no woman in parliament. And for me, there is nothing as ridiculous as that. That you have like 25 men sitting in parliament, there is no single woman to be part of that highest decision-making level in a state. And in the country as a whole, we're going to come to that statistics very soon. You find that we have very few women, in the House of Representatives and in the House, in the Senate. Now, so what we're saying here is that when we talk about gender inequality, it is real. It is not semantics. It is real because the statistics show us very clearly. So if you look at slide 16, we have an interesting graph there, and it's titled Female to Male Ratio in the Nigerian Senate. By the last count, out of 109 seats in the Senate, we have only 8 occupied by women. So look at 8 versus 101. How are the women faring? And this is, an indicator that helps us to measure the level of equality in every country. It's a globally acclaimed indicator. Look at slide 17. A similar graph is there. Ratio of females to males in the Nigerian House of Representatives. In the House of Reps, we have 360 seats, out of which only 12 are occupied by women. A whopping 348 are occupied by men. So when we talk about numerical representation, how do we expect that 12 females in the House of Representatives will be able to compete against 348 men? And that is why substantive representation is needed, because we need to lobby some of the men who wield power in those places of decision making, including our communities, to support some of those issues that affect women. Because when we talk about women's issues, they are not just issues that pertain to women. When a woman has those issues affect her productivity, and they affect her family, they affect the workplace, they affect the nation at large. And that is why we think that, it's an issue that should interest every human being. Now, slide 18 actually lists some of the states, with legislative houses with 0 women in parliament. This may have been overtaken by events. Either we have more states now or we have fewer states, but it is really pathetic that we have this situation happening in our country. Now we are on slide 19, and slide 19 talks about categories of power. You know that gender equality has to do with the subject of power. Who has power to speak? Who has power to claim their space? Even when government says education is free, for example, who has power to take decision to put children in school or to claim that free education that is made available for everybody? Sometimes various things keep children away from school. When you see children hawking on the street during school hours, some of them it's poverty, some of them, there are several reasons why children will not be able to claim those things. And we're saying that in some places we can have boys being more affected, there's no doubt about it, but in many places girls are more affected, when it comes to the issues of inequality. Now, power can be categorized into various forms. We have what we call visible power, we have what we call hidden power, and we have what we call invisible power. Now, for visible power, it is power exercised through formal rules, laws, structures, and procedures such as parliaments, local governments, council of elders, or village chiefs, and all of that. And it is called visible because it is based on formal rules and laws. Those people were elected into office or appointed into office, and so their offices are visible. Now, if you think about women's participation in visible power, in those spaces, you will find that it is really abysmal. Now, there's what we call also hidden power. And hidden power is power exercised from behind the scenes by powerful people who are able to influence decisions and outcomes to their own advantage at local, national, and international levels. We find that, of course, a lot of people wield hidden power, including women. Many women wield hidden power. They are able to prevail on their husbands, their spouses, or their children, to do their bidding, depending on where their interest lies. But not many women are able to fully exercise that power because they've been brainwashed, of course, to think that it is not their calling. They don't have a mandate to do that. And then we have what we call invisible power. Invisible power shapes the way we see the world. It's our brainwashing. It's our history. It's the traditions. It's the beliefs or habits, the unwritten rules which influence how we see the world. So a woman sits in her corner and another woman comes and says, I want your vote, to canvass vote. I want your vote. I want to be a legislator in my state. And that woman sitting in her corner is looking at the fellow woman and saying, what's nonsense? Where do we have women going to speak where men are speaking? That woman is already suffering from what we call invisible power because she has been brainwashed. She has been told that a woman is supposed to keep quiet, a woman should be seen, just look beautiful and be seen and be admired, and not make yourself heard. And unfortunately, we also have many men. In fact, that's a big issue in our country. Many men who believe that a woman should not speak. It goes as far as our religious leaders. And because Nigeria is such a religious country, when your religious leader says women should keep quiet, and then of course, everybody carries it and says this is what God has said. We need to watch out for that. A lot of brainwashing. And how are we raising our own children? So how are we brainwashing them, and making them feel inadequate to speak, making them feel inadequate to participate just because they are female or they are male. Now let's look at benefits of women's participation. Are there benefits? Why are we promoting women's participation? Why is the SDG talking about proportion of women in parliament and all of that? And the studies have shown that actually when women participate in governance or in decision making in any sphere, because not just in public governance, that there are attendant benefits, and these benefits are pulled out of empirical studies. One of them says higher numbers of women in parliament and other public office positions generally contribute to stronger attention to family issues, education, water, health. I'm sure that we're all aware, that women, because of their upbringing, socialization to pay attention to family. When a woman also finds herself in Senate or in the House of Reps or in the State Assembly, what she's thinking about is also how to attend to family issues. She is thinking, how can we put water in every community? Because she knows the value of water. What can we do about education policies or laws in the school to ensure that our children go to school? Many mothers, including my mother-in-law, had to sell a lot. My mother-in-law had to sell her bicycle. So many mothers have borrowed money from various cooperative societies just to put children in school. So when such a woman gets to parliament, guess what she's thinking? How do we allocate the resources of the state to ensure that every child is in school? So women being in parliament is actually brings benefits to the entire society. It's not for selfish reasons. Now, still on slide 20, the second bullet says countries that place women's issues on the agenda have better human development indices. I've talked about that before. Look at the Nordic countries, Norway, and co. You will find that they're actually top there. Up there on the chart when it comes to countries' human development indices. Whereas countries like our country, Nigeria, because of inequality, we're actually lagging behind in a lot of things. Women in public office encourage greater political engagement by other women. So where you see a woman, occupying a public office, it also helps to, stimulate other women to want to emulate her. Our sister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is shining, in the World Trade Organization at this time. You see how many Nigerian women and even some funny men, how they tie their gele now to mimic Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala because she's a shining star. She's occupying a big office globally and she's a shining star. So when women also see fellow women going out there, being able to break barriers and then, engage in politics or other form of, worthy venture to get to the top, it also encourages fellow women. It shows them possibilities, makes it easy for them to relate with, being in those kinds of elevated positions.